Good evening and welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to have you here, and I'd like to thank Professor Homi Bhabha and Sarah Razor and the Humanities Center for organizing this event. As you may know, there's another related event, a theater event tomorrow evening. David Herskovits is speaking at 6 p.m. in the Barker Center, I believe. Is that right? Yeah, in Thompson Room at the same time. I also wanted to let you know that the second of the Writers Speak events will be on April 3rd, Monday, April 3rd, at 6 p.m. in 113 Seaver, and in a month's time. And that is an event with two writers, Francisco Goldman and Daniel Alarcón are coming together, and it will be very interesting, so please try to make it. I know how great a pleasure it is for me to welcome Jennifer Egan, and I know too how great a pleasure it is for many of you here in the audience. A number of young writers have told me how important her work is to you, and although I am a few years older, I feel the same way. I first encountered Jenny's work when, soon after college, I was working in London as a freelance journalist and was asked to review Emerald City, Jenny's first book, a collection of powerful, distinct, and distinctly memorable short stories. This, of course, was back in the days of typewriters and copy takers, so I couldn't rustle up a copy of my review to quote from. But I remember how fiercely I admired the book, and I remember telling friends to read it, and that's a big deal, because as my friends can tell you, I remember almost nothing and sometimes even forget that I've even read a book that I've reviewed. I mentioned my 20-year-old passion for Jenny Egan's work not long ago to a fellow writer and professor here, and he not only remembered his experience of reading that collection when it came out, but of reading one of its stories, The Stylist, in The New Yorker when he was a graduate student, and how everyone in his MFA program pored over it with admiration and envy. The point is, Jennifer Egan's work is genuinely unforgettable. It's also always exhilarating, surprising, meticulously realized, and utterly fierce. In the 2 decades since her first book, she's published 4 novels: The Invisible Circus, Look at Me, The Keep, and of course, A Visit from the Goon Squad, winner of the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award, a book many of you know well and have marveled over, in which, over the course of 13 chapters written from different points of view, including the point of view of PowerPoint, spanning in all over 40 years, she creates a necklace of narratives that, as Kathleen Shine wrote in the New York Review of Books, creates, quote, a moving humanistic saga, an enormous 19th century style epic brilliantly disguised as ironic postmodern pastiche. She has a new novel coming out in the fall, Manhattan Beach, which I hope we'll talk about a bit this evening. As the comic troupe Monty Python would have had it, now for something completely different, a man with a tape recorder up his nose. Because the only thing that can be inserted with certainty about Egan's fictions is that each is radically different. As she has said, if I've read it or done it before, then I'm not interested. My aesthetic or my method is basically guided by curiosity and desire. That curiosity has led her to imagine wildly diverse worlds and ideas, often presciently. It has led her, too, to turn what my mother would have called her gimlet eye upon the contemporary. Chief among her peers, Jenny Egan has written from various angles and at a variety of moments about how mass media and culture affects our evolving understanding of selfhood, from obsessive self-consciousness and image awareness to the acceleration of time's passage to the effects of technology on communication and relationships. That makes her work sound intellectual and potentially daunting, but of course the joy of Egan's fiction is her marriage of intellectual and human inquiry with what one reviewer calls the pleasures of narrative. The writer Heidi Julavits put it this way, in words I wouldn't myself have been able to come up with, but they're good. Egan is a super thinky writer in quasi-disguise, a writer who alchemizes big ideas into works of emotional intensity and architectural intricacy, the result being sneaky books you can recommend to those friends and relatives who who demand recognizable characters and thumping storylines, but whom you hope might find tantalizing beneath these vibrant entertainments, the buzzing circuitry of Egan's mighty brain. A good number of contemporary literary writers write compellingly. A perhaps smaller number are intellectually thrilling in the bargain. Almost none combine these attributes with a great sense of humor, abundant curiosity, formal daring, generosity of spirit, and wisdom. Oh, and the prose, my friends, the prose. There is nothing, it seems, beyond this writer's reach. How fortunate we are to have her with us this evening. Welcome, Jennifer Egan.
Thank you. Oh my God. Well, I have to say, no one could ask for more than that. Thank you for that absolutely beautiful introduction. Not sure I've earned it, but I certainly enjoyed it. Especially coming from a writer whose work I have been reading for many, many years. And it's strange that our paths haven't really crossed at all. But this is really a delight. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Homie, for inviting me. And I thought I would read, as Claire mentioned, I have a new book coming out, but I'm moved to return to Goon Squad for maybe the last time, actually. And especially because in thinking back to what led me to write this book, and it began very serendipitously, I actually started to write it because I was having trouble with this massive research project I was doing, which is the book I now have finally finished. And I was looking at piles of research and feeling very daunted and not really wanting to get started a few years ago. And I met my mother for dinner at her hotel. And while I was using the ladies' room, I looked down while I was washing my hands, and I saw a bag with a wallet sitting in it. And I immediately felt terribly anxious on behalf of the wallet owner because I myself have been robbed an unbelievable number of times and ways. On a motorcycle, on a scooter, numerous pickpocketings. But the particular theft that has always stayed with me was one that actually happened in New York. My wallet was stolen, and I was supposed to fly later that day to visit my mom, actually, in California. This was before the days when you needed, 5 kinds of ID to fly, but even so, without money or any ID, I was not really sure how I was going to get to the airport, and I was sort of freaking out about this. And the telephone rang, and lo and behold, it was the Citibank fraud recovery program. And they said, look, we can help you. What did you have in there? Let's go through it one by one. And the woman was very nice, and I wept a bit, as one does, having just been robbed. And so we talked, and I needed a new cash card, obviously. So I chose a new PIN number, and she said, now, it can't be the same as your old one. And I said, no, my old one was, and I mentioned what it was. And the conversation wound down very quickly because I was talking to the thief. And she had done a brilliant job of mimicking the telephone habits of a bank employee, tapping on her keyboard in the background. She proceeded to dash to the nearest cash machine because now she had not only my card, but my PIN number. And she actually overdrew my account, which I didn't know you could even do. So when all of this came to light, I was crying before. You can imagine the state I was in after I finally realized what had happened. I was absolutely beside myself. A neighbor lent me money to get to the airport, and I told my sad story in the cab on the way to the airport, and the guy said, "You gave her your PIN number?" So didn't get a lot of sympathy for that. But later, I found that the theft haunted me, not just because I had been so shocked and taken advantage of, but because I was dying to know who this woman was that I had spent 10 minutes on the telephone with. And I kept thinking, what was it like for her? Was she actually sympathetic? What was she thinking? Now, I think we kind of know what she was thinking. She was thinking, wow, this is going so well. I couldn't ask for better. But I found myself preoccupied with her point of view. And I'm generally, with fiction, interested in exploring points of view that are different from my own, and maybe the most fun is to explore a point of view that is directly opposed to my own. So I thought, I think tomorrow, I return to the table with my mother. Instead of trying to work on this long research project, I'm just going to start from that minute. A woman sees another person's a woman sees another woman's wallet in the ladies' room, and she takes it. Boom. And so I wrote what I thought was a freestanding short story. And in the course of that short story, there was one mention of another character whom we don't meet that sort of intrigued me. And I thought, who is he? That's interesting. So I thought, okay, I'll write one more about him. And in the course of writing that one, there was a mention of another character, and I thought, well, she seems kind of interesting. And then I thought, okay, this is getting a little out of hand, so we're going to call this a trilogy, and after 3, you are done, and back to that pile. But in fact, after writing the 3rd one, I realized I'm not writing that other book right now. I'm writing this one. So in a way, I already knew a lot about the book before I even knew it was a book, because I thought, what's fun about this? Okay, I want each chapter to be about a different person. I want each chapter to feel like it's part of a different book, to be different from the others technically, and I want each one to stand completely on its own, because if I'm going to ask people to start over every time, I need to provide a complete payoff every time. And that was pretty much how I proceeded, with some failures along the way and things I tried that didn't work. And that was how the book got written. So I'm going to read that first chapter, which I started the next morning after seeing the wallet. Found objects. It began the usual way in the bathroom of the L'Ossimo Hotel. Sasha was adjusting her yellow eyeshadow in the mirror when she noticed a bag on the floor beside the sink that must have belonged to the woman whose peeing she could faintly hear through the vault-like door of a toilet stall. Inside the rim of the bag, barely visible, was a wallet made of pale green leather. It was easy for Sasha to recognize, looking back, that the peeing woman's blind trust had provoked her. We live in a city where people will steal the hair off your head if you give them half a chance, but you leave your stuff lying in plain sight and expect it to be waiting for you when you come back? It made her want to teach the woman a lesson. But this wish only camouflaged the deeper feeling Sasha always had, that fat, tender wallet offering itself to her hand. It seemed so dull, so life as usual, to just leave it there rather than seize the moment, accept the challenge, take the leap, fly the coop, throw caution to the wind, live dangerously. I get it, Kaz, her therapist said. And take the fucking thing. You mean steal it. He was trying to get Sasha to use that word, which was harder to avoid in the case of a wallet than with a lot of the things she'd lifted over the past year when her condition, as Kaz referred to it, had begun to accelerate. 5 sets of keys, 14 pairs of sunglasses, a child's striped scarf, binoculars, a cheese grater, a pocket knife, 28 bars of soap, and 85 pens, ranging from cheap ballpoints she'd used to sign debit card slips to the aubergine Visconti that cost $260 online, which she'd lifted from her former boss's lawyer during a contracts meeting. Sasha no longer took anything from stores. Their cold, inert goods didn't tempt her, only from people. Okay, she said, steal it. Sasha and Kaz had dubbed that feeling she got the personal challenge, as in taking the wallet was a way for Sasha to assert her toughness, her individuality. What they needed to do was switch things around in her head so that the challenge became not taking the wallet, but leaving it. That would be the cure, although Kaz never used words like cure. He wore funky sweaters and let her call him Kaz, but he was old school inscrutable, to the point where Sasha couldn't tell if he was gay or straight, if he'd written famous books, or if, as she sometimes suspected, he was one of those escaped cons who impersonate surgeons and wind up leaving their operating tools inside people's skulls. Of course, these questions could have been resolved on Google in less than a minute, but they were useful questions, according to Kaz, and so far, Sasha had resisted. The couch where she lay in his office was blue leather and very soft. Kaz liked the couch, he'd told her, because it relieved them both of the burden of eye contact. You don't like eye contact? Sasha had asked. It seemed like a weird thing for a therapist to admit. I find it tiring, he'd said. This way we can both look where we want. Where will you look? He smiled. You can see my options. Where do you usually look when people are on the couch? Around the room, Kaz said, at the ceiling, into space. Do you ever sleep? No. Sasha usually looked at the window which faced the street, and tonight, as she continued her story, was rippled with rain. She'd glimpsed the wallet, tender and overripe as a peach. She'd plucked it from the woman's bag and slipped it into her own small handbag, which she'd zipped shut before the sound of peeing had stopped. She'd flicked open the bathroom door and floated back through the lobby to the bar. She and the wallet's owner had never seen each other. Pre-wallet, Sasha had been in the grip of a dire evening. Lame date, yet another, brooding behind dark bangs, sometimes glancing at the flat-screen TV, where a Jets game seemed to interest him more than Sasha's admittedly overhandled tales of Benny Salazar, her old boss, who was famous for founding the Sow's Ear record label and who also, Sasha happened to know, sprinkled gold flakes into his coffee, as an aphrodisiac she suspected, and sprayed pesticide in his armpits. That was the guy I had to find out more about. Post-wallet, however, the scene tingled with mirthful possibility. Sasha felt the waiters eyeing her as she sidled back to the table, holding her handbag with its secret weight. She sat down and took a sip of her melon madness martini and cocked her head at Alex. She smiled her yes-no smile. Hello, she said. The yes-no smile was amazingly effective. You're happy, Alex said. I'm always happy, Sasha said. Sometimes I just forget. Alex had paid the bill while she was in the bathroom, clear proof that he'd been on the verge of aborting their date. Now he studied her. You feel like going somewhere else? They stood. Alex wore black cords and a white button-up shirt. He was a legal secretary. On email, he'd been fanciful, almost goofy, but in person, he seemed simultaneously anxious and bored. She could tell that he was in excellent shape, not from going to the gym, but from being young enough that his body was still imprinted with whatever sports he'd played in high school and college. Sasha, who was 35, had passed that point. Still, not even Kaz knew her real age. The closest anyone had come to guessing it was 31, and most put her in her 20s. She worked out daily and avoided the sun. Her online profiles all listed her as 28. As she followed Alex from the bar, she couldn't resist unzipping her purse and touching the fat green wallet, just for a second, for the contraction it made her feel around her heart. You're aware of how the theft makes you feel, Kaz said, to the point where you remind yourself of it to improve your mood. But do you think about how it makes the other person feel? Sasha tipped back her head to look at him. She made a point of doing this now and then, just to remind Kaz that she wasn't an idiot. She knew the question had a right answer. She and Kaz were collaborators, writing a story whose end had already been determined. She would get well. She would stop stealing from people and start caring again about the things that had once guided her. Music, the network of friends she'd made when she first came to New York, a set of goals she'd scrawled on a big sheet of newsprint and taped to the walls of her early apartments. Find a band to manage. Understand the news. Study Japanese. Practice the harp. I don't think about the people, Sasha said. But it isn't that you lack empathy, Kaz said. We know that because of the plumber. Sasha sighed. She'd told Kaz the plumber story about a month ago, and he'd found a way to bring it up at almost every session since. The plumber was an old man sent by Sasha's landlord to investigate a leak in the apartment below hers. He'd appeared in Sasha's doorway, tufts of gray on his head, and within a minute, boom, he'd hit the floor and crawled under her bathtub like an animal fumbling its way into a familiar hole. The fingers he'd groped toward the bolts behind the tub were grimed to cigar stubs, and reaching made his sweatshirt hike up, exposing a soft, white back. Sasha turned away, stricken by the old man's abasement, anxious to leave for her temp job, except that the plumber was talking to her, asking about the length and frequency of her showers. I never use it, she told him curtly. I shower at the gym. He nodded without acknowledging her rudeness. apparently used to it. Sasha's nose began to prickle. She shut her eyes and pushed hard on both temples. Opening her eyes, she saw the plumber's tool belt lying on the floor at her feet. It had a beautiful screwdriver in it, the orange translucent handle gleaming like a lollipop in its worn leather loop, the silvery shaft sculpted, sparkling. Sasha felt herself contract around the object in a single yawn of appetite. She needed to hold the screwdriver just for a minute. She bent her knees and plucked it noiselessly from the belt. Not a bangle jangled. Her bony hands were spastic at most things, but she was good at this, made for it, she often thought, in the first drifty moments after lifting something. And once the screwdriver was in her hand, she felt instant relief from the pain of having an old, soft-backed man snuffling under her tub, and then something more than relief, a blessed indifference, as if the very idea of feeling pain over such a thing were baffling. "And what about after he'd gone?" Kaz had asked when Sasha told him the story. "How did the screwdriver look to you then?" There was a pause. "Normal," she said. "Really? Not special anymore?" "Like any screwdriver." Sasha had heard Kaz shift behind her and felt something happen in the room. The screwdriver, which she'd placed on the table, recently supplemented with a second table, where she kept the things she lifted and which she'd barely looked at since, seemed to hang in the air of Kaz's office. It floated between them, a symbol. "And how did you feel," Kaz asked quietly, "about having taken it from the plumber you pitied?" How did she feel? How did she feel? There was a right answer, of course. At times, Sasha had to fight the urge to lie simply as a way of depriving Kaz of it. "Bad," she said. "Okay? I felt bad. Shit, I'm bankrupting myself to pay for you. Obviously, I get that this isn't a great way to live." More than once, Kaz had tried to connect the plumber to Sasha's father, who had disappeared when she was 6. She was careful not to indulge this line of thinking. "I don't remember him," she told Kaz. "I have nothing to say." She did this for Kaz's protection and her own. They were writing a story of redemption, of fresh beginnings and second chances, but in that direction lay only sorrow. Sasha and Alex crossed the lobby of the L'Ossimo Hotel in the direction of the street. Sasha hugged her purse to her shoulder, the warm ball of wallet snuggled in her armpit. As they passed the angular, budded branches by the big glass doors to the street, a woman zigzagged into their path. "Wait," she said. "You haven't seen? I'm desperate." Sasha felt a twang of terror. It was the woman whose wallet she'd taken. She knew this instantly, although the person before her had nothing in common with the blithe, raven-haired wallet owner she'd pictured. This woman had vulnerable brown eyes and flat, pointy shoes that clicked too loudly on the marble floor. There was plenty of gray in her frizzy brown hair. Sasha took Alex's arm, trying to steer him through the doors. She felt his pulse of surprise at her touch, but he stayed put. "Have we seen what?" he said. "Someone stole my wallet. My ID is gone, and I have to catch a plane tomorrow morning. I'm just desperate." She stared beseechingly at both of them. It was the sort of frank need that New Yorkers quickly learn how to hide, and Sasha recoiled. It had never occurred to her that the woman was from out of town. "Have you called the police?" Alex asked. "The concierge said he would call, but I'm also wondering, could it have fallen out somewhere?" She looked helplessly at the marble floor around their feet. Sasha relaxed slightly. This woman was the type who annoyed people without meaning to. Apology shadowed her movements even now as she followed Alex to the concierge desk. Sasha trailed behind. "Is someone helping this person?" she heard Alex ask. The concierge was young and spiky-haired. "We've called the police," he said defensively. Alex turned to the woman. "Where did this happen?" "In the ladies' room, I think." "Who else was there?" "No one." "It was empty?" "There might have been someone, but I didn't see her." Alex swung around to Sasha. "You were just in the bathroom," he said. "Did you see anyone?" "No," she managed to say. She had Xanax in her purse, but she couldn't open her purse. Even with it zipped, she feared that the wallet would blurt into view in some way that she couldn't control, unleashing a cascade of horrors: arrest, shame, poverty, death. Alex turned to the concierge. "How come I'm asking these questions instead of you?" he said. "Someone just got robbed in your hotel. Don't you have, security?" The words robbed and security managed to pierce the soothing backbeat that pumped through not just the L'Ossimo, but every hotel like it in New York City. There was a mild ripple of interest from the lobby. "I've called security," the concierge said, adjusting his neck. "I'll call them again." Sasha glanced at Alex. He was angry, and the anger made him recognizable in a way that an hour of aimless chatter, mostly hers, it was true, had not. He was new to New York. He came from someplace smaller. He had a thing or two to prove about how people should treat one another. 2 security guys showed up, the same on TV and in life, beefy guys whose scrupulous politeness was somehow linked to their willingness to crack skulls. They dispersed to search the bar. Sasha wished feverishly that she'd left the wallet there, as if this were an impulse she'd barely resisted. "I'll check the bathroom," she told Alex, and forced herself to walk slowly around the elevator bank. The bathroom was empty. Sasha opened her purse, took out the wallet, unearthed her vial of Xanax, and popped one between her teeth. They worked faster if you chewed them. As the caustic taste flooded her mouth, she scanned the room, trying to decide where to ditch the wallet. In the stall, under the sink? The decision paralyzed her. She had to do this right, to emerge unscathed, and if she did, she had a frenzied sense of making a promise to cause. The bathroom door opened, and the woman walked in. Her frantic eyes met Sasha's in the bathroom mirror, narrow, green, equally frantic. There was a pause during which Sasha felt that she was being confronted. The woman had known all along. Sasha handed her the wallet. She saw, from the woman's stunned expression, that she was wrong. "I'm sorry," Sasha said. "It's a problem I have." The woman opened the wallet. Her physical relief at having it back coursed through Sasha in a warm rush, as if their bodies had fused. "Everything's there, I swear," she said. "I didn't even open it. It's this problem I have, but I'm getting help. Please don't tell. I'm hanging on by a thread." The woman glanced up, her soft brown eyes moving over Sasha's face. What did she see? Sasha wished that she could turn and peer in the mirror again, as if something about herself might at last be revealed, some lost thing. But she didn't turn. She held still and let the woman look. It struck her that the woman was close to her own age, her real age. She probably had children at home. "Okay," the woman said, looking down. "It's between us." "Thank you," Sasha said. "Thank you, thank you." Relief and the first gentle waves of Xanax made her feel faint, and she leaned against the wall. She sensed the woman's eagerness to get away. She longed to slide to the floor. There was a tap on the door, a man's voice. "Any luck?" Sasha and Alex left the hotel and stepped into desolate, windy Tribeca. She'd suggested the L'Ossimo out of habit. It was near Sow's Ear Records, where she'd worked for 12 years as Benny Salazar's assistant. But she hated the neighborhood at night without the World Trade Center, whose blazing freeways of light had always filled her with hope. She was tired of Alex. In a mere 20 minutes, they'd blown past the desired point of meaningful connection through shared experience into the less appealing state of knowing each other too well. Alex wore a knit cap pulled over his forehead. His eyelashes were long and black. "That was weird," he said finally. "Yeah," Sasha said. Then after a pause, "You mean finding it?" "The whole thing, but yeah." He turned to her. "Was it concealed from view?" "It was lying on the floor, in the corner, kind of behind a planter." The utterance of this lie caused pinpricks of sweat to emerge on Sasha's Xanax-soothed skull. She considered saying, "Actually, there was no planter," but managed not to. "It's almost like she did it on purpose," Alex said, "for attention or something." She didn't seem like that type. You can't tell. That's something I'm learning here in NYC. You have no fucking idea what people are really like. They're not even two-faced. They're like multiple personalities. She wasn't from New York, Sasha said, irked by his obliviousness even as she strove to preserve it. Remember, she was getting on a plane. True, Alex said. He paused and cocked his head, regarding Sasha across the ill-lit sidewalk. But you know what I'm talking about? That thing about people? I do know, she said carefully, but I think you get used to it. I'd rather just go somewhere else. It took Sasha a moment to understand. There is nowhere else, she said. Alex turned to her, startled. Then he grinned. Sasha grinned back, not the yes-no smile, but related. That's ridiculous, Alex said. They took a cab and climbed the 4 flights to Sasha's Lower East Side walk-up. She'd lived there 6 years. The place smelled of scented candles, and there was a velvet throw cloth on her sofa bed and lots of pillows and an old color TV with a very good picture and an array of souvenirs from her travels lining the windowsills. A white seashell, a pair of red dice, a small canister of tiger balm from China, now dried to the texture of rubber, a tiny bonsai tree that she watered faithfully. Look at this, Alex said. You've got a tub in the kitchen. I've heard of that. I mean, I've read about it, but I wasn't sure there were any left. The shower thing is new, right? This is a bathtub in the kitchen apartment, right? Yep, Sasha said, but I almost never use it. I shower at the gym. The tub was covered with a fitted board where Sasha stacked her plates. Alex ran his hands around the rim of the bath and examined its clawed feet. Sasha lit her candles, took a bottle of grappa from the kitchen cupboard, and filled 2 small glasses. I love this place, Alex said. It feels like old New York. You know this stuff is around, but how do you find it? Sasha leaned against the tub beside him and took a tiny sip of grappa. It tasted like Xanax. She was trying to remember Alex's age on his profile. 28, she thought, but he seemed younger than that, maybe a lot younger. She saw her apartment as he must see it, a bit of local color that would fade almost instantly into the tumble of adventures that everyone has on first coming to New York. It jarred Sasha to think of herself as a glint in the hazy memories that Alex would struggle to organize a year or 2 from now. Where was that place with the bathtub? Who was that girl? He left the tub to explore the apartment. To one side of the kitchen was Sasha's bedroom. On the other side, facing the street, was her living room den office, which contained 2 upholstered chairs and the desk she reserved for projects outside of work, publicity for bands she believed in, short reviews for Vibe and Spin, although these had fallen off sharply in recent years. In fact, the whole apartment, which 6 years ago had seemed like a way station to some better place, had ended up solidifying around Sasha, gathering mass and weight, until she felt both mired in it and lucky to have it, as if she not only couldn't move on, but didn't want to. Alex leaned over to peer at the tiny collection on her windowsills. He paused at the picture of Rob, Sasha's friend, who had drowned in college, but made no comment. He hadn't noticed the tables where she kept the pile of things she'd stolen. The pens, the binoculars, the keys, the child's scarf, which she'd lifted simply by not returning it when it dropped from a little girl's neck as her mother led her by the hand from a Starbucks. Sasha was already seeing Kaz by then, so she recognized the litany of excuses, even as they throbbed through her head. Winter's almost over. Children grow so fast. Kids hate scarves. It's too late. They're out the door. I'm embarrassed to return it. I could easily not have seen it fall. In fact, I didn't. I'm just noticing it now. Look, a scarf. A kid's bright yellow scarf with pink stripes. Too bad. Who could it belong to? Well, I'll just pick it up and hold it a minute. At home, she washed the scarf by hand and folded it neatly. It was one of the things she liked best. What's all this? Alex asked. He discovered the tables now and was staring at the pile. It looked like the work of a miniaturist beaver. a heap of objects that was illegible, yet clearly not random. To Sasha's eye, it almost shook under its load of embarrassments and close shaves and little triumphs and moments of pure exhilaration. It contained years of her life compressed. The screwdriver was at the outer edge. Sasha moved closer to Alex, drawn to the sight of him taking everything in. "And how did you feel standing with Alex in front of all those things you'd stolen?" Kaz asked. Sasha turned her face into the blue couch because her cheeks were heating up, and she hated that. She didn't want to explain to Kaz the mix of feelings she'd had standing there with Alex. The pride she took in these objects, a tenderness that was only heightened by the shame of their acquisition. She'd risked everything, and here was the result, the raw, warped core of her life. Watching Alex move his eyes over the pile of objects stirred something in Sasha. She put her arms around him from behind, and he turned, surprised but willing. She kissed him full on the mouth, then undid his zipper and kicked off her boots. Alex tried to lead her toward the other room, where they could lie down on the sofa bed, but Sasha dropped to her knees beside the tables and pulled him down, the Persian carpet prickling her back, street light falling through the window onto his hungry, hopeful face, his bare white thighs. Afterward, they lay on the rug for a long time. The candle started to sputter. Sasha saw the prickly shape of the bonsai silhouetted against the window near her head. All her excitement had seeped away, leaving behind a terrible sadness, an emptiness that felt violent, as if she'd been gouged. She tottered to her feet, hoping Alex would leave soon. He still had his shirt on. "You know what I feel like doing?" he said, standing up. "Taking a bath in that tub." "You can," Sasha said dully. "It works. The plumber was just here." She pulled up her jeans and collapsed onto a chair. Alex went to the tub, carefully removed the plates from the wood cover, and lifted it off. Water gushed from the faucet. Its force had always startled Sasha the few times she'd used it. Alex's black pants were crumpled on the floor at Sasha's feet. The square of his wallet had worn away the corduroy from one of the back pockets, as if he often wore these pants, and always with the wallet in that place. Sasha glanced over at him. Steam rose from the tub as he dipped in a hand to test the water. Then he came back to the pile of objects and leaned close, as if looking for something specific. Sasha watched him, hoping for a tremor of the excitement she'd felt before, but it was gone. "Can I put some of these in?" He was holding up a packet of bath salts Sasha had taken from her best friend Lizzie a couple of years ago before they'd stopped speaking. The salts were still in their polka dot wrapping. They'd been deep in the middle of the pile, which had collapsed a little from the extraction. How had Alex even seen them? Sasha hesitated. She and Kaz had talked at length about why she kept the stolen objects separate from the rest of her life, because using them would imply greed or self-interest, because leaving them untouched made it seem as if she might one day give them back, because piling them in a heap kept their power from leaking away. "I guess," she said, "I guess you can." She was aware of having made a move in the story she and Kaz were writing, taken a symbolic step, but toward the happy ending or away from it. She felt Alex's hand on the back of her head, stroking her hair. "You like it hot?" he asked, "or medium?" "Hot," she said. "Really, really hot." "Me too." He went back to the tub and fiddled with the knobs and shook in some of the salts, and the room instantly filled with a steamy, plant-like odor that was deeply familiar to Sasha, the smell of Lizzie's bathroom from the days when Sasha used to shower there after she and Lizzie went running together in Central Park. "Where are your towels?" Alex called. She kept them folded in a basket in the bathroom. Alex went to get them, then shut the bathroom door. Sasha heard him starting to pee. She knelt on the floor and slipped his wallet from his pants pocket and opened it, her heart firing with a sudden pressure. It was a plain black wallet, worn to gray along the edges. Rapidly, she flicked through its contents, a debit card, a work ID, a gym card. In a side pocket, a faded picture of 2 boys and a girl in braces squinting on a beach, a sports team in yellow uniforms, heads so small she couldn't even tell if one of them belonged to Alex. From among these dog-eared photos, a scrap of binder paper dropped into Sasha's lap. It looked very old, the edges torn, the pale blue lines rubbed almost away. Sasha unfolded it and saw written in blunt pencil, "I believe in you." She froze, staring at the words. They seemed to tunnel toward her from their meager scrap, bringing a flush of embarrassment for Alex, who'd kept this disintegrating tribute in his disintegrating wallet, and then shame at herself for having looked at it. She was faintly aware of the sink taps being turned on and of the need to move quickly. Hastily, mechanically, she reassembled the wallet, keeping the slip of paper in her hand. "I'm just going to hold this," she was aware of telling herself as she tucked the wallet back into Alex's pocket. "I'll put it back later. He probably doesn't remember it's in there. I'll actually be doing him a favor by getting it out of the way before someone finds it. I'll say, 'Hey, I noticed this on the rug. Is it yours?' And he'll say, 'That? I've never seen it before. It must be yours, Sasha.' And maybe that's true. Maybe someone gave it to me years ago, and I forgot." "And did you put it back?" Kaz asked. "I didn't have a chance. He came out of the bathroom." "And what about later, after the bath, or the next time you saw him?" "After the bath, he put on his pants and left. I haven't talked to him since." There was a pause, during which Sasha was keenly aware of Kaz behind her, waiting. She wanted badly to please him, to say something like, "It was a turning point. Everything feels different now." Or, "I called Lizzie, and we made up finally." Or, "I've picked up the harp again." Or just, "I'm changing, I'm changing, I'm changing. I've changed." Redemption, transformation, God, how she wanted those things. Every day, every minute. Didn't everyone? "Please," she told Kaz, "don't ask me how I feel." "All right," he said quietly. They sat in silence, the longest silence that had ever passed between them. Sasha looked at the window pane, rinsed continually with rain, smearing lights in the falling dark. She lay with her body tensed, claiming the couch, her spot in this room, her view of the window and the walls, the faint hum that was always there when she listened, and these minutes of Kaz's time. Another, then one more. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. She does get to change, though.
Mm-hmm. She really does.
But you wouldn't have imagined it. Did you?
Well, it was the last thing to happen, actually, in that book was to find a way to render that change. Because I couldn't, having decided that I would only write one chapter about each person, I was finding it very difficult to get a view of Sasha at a later point. And so I actually tried to break my rule and write about her again. Because I thought, well, rules, you have to break a rule if you make a rule. But in fact, I couldn't seem to break it and do it. I couldn't make anything happen. And when I would try to write from her point of view, it just was dead. I couldn't do that again. So I actually sold the book without any, I mean, we have a glimpse of her future. We know that she ends up married and has children, but I couldn't find a way to render it. And then after I also desperately wanted to write in PowerPoint for other reasons. And after I sold the book, I sort of had an idea of how I could do both of those things at once. So that real sort of jump into her life in the future happened very late.
Wow. So interesting. So interesting. There are many things, I'm shrieking apparently. Many things to pick up on in that, and one of them is this. You've said various times about how intuitive your process is, rather than, and I wanted to ask you about that because I feel the same way, and yet of course I teach creative writing, which is strangely counterintuitive if you feel that it's really intuitive. And you, it allies to something that you've said elsewhere, which is that in the beginning you felt you needed to, when you were starting out as a young writer, you felt you needed to, you worried that people wouldn't understand what you were trying to say and felt you needed to sort of
Drive the point home.
drive the point home. And I wondered how that related to this balance of intuition and willful direction in your work.
Well, I think I mean, I have many answers to that. Just to address the teaching issue, though, to me, the fact that it's intuitive doesn't mean it can't be taught, because, I mean, there are two things a teacher can do that are so helpful, and I've had teachers help me with those things. One is just how to access your own unconscious, which can be tricky. It's different for everyone. And sort of how to honor the good things that come from it. And then the second thing is just how to edit, how to turn a mess, which is what I always start out with, into something that is potentially interesting. I mean, that's where it all happens for me. What I write initially is just god-awful, frankly, because it's so intuitive. I mean, really.
I doubt it.
Well, I'll give you an example. The first line of this book, in that short story, when I wrote the first draft, was, "She knew it was wrong." I mean, come on. That's not very good. So, I have to kind of start with it in cliched and kind of obvious terms sometimes, and then I move away from that. Sometimes the meaning is kind of, it's almost like I'm trying to telegraph it to myself. Or maybe I just knew that sentence was wrong and it was just an absolute comment on its own worth. I don't know. In terms of the other part of your question, which is how to balance intuition with craft, and what was the other part of it?
Well, that need to balance also having something to say or feeling that you're trying to convey something with a trust in the reader or in the openness of the process, rather than feeling you need to start precisely by saying she knew it was wrong.
I think that's the one thing that may really have changed about my priorities as a writer. I now feel like the most important thing is actually mystery. So I've done a complete 180 on that. I mean, I feel like, I was so afraid of not being understood, and now I think if it can be fully understood, then I've done something wrong. There's not enough there. There has to be something that resonates beyond whatever particular, meaning we might want to put there. And I guess in a way, I've thrown my lot in with intuition. I guess that's really the answer, because I've come to feel that, if something is working and feels right, I almost don't want to look at it too closely. I feel like I don't even need to know. Why take it apart? I can just let it be there. So I've gotten much more interested in I guess, unanswered questions than answered questions, or in asking questions as opposed to trying to answer them. I used to have big theories that I wanted to share. I don't think anyone likes it when someone tries to instruct them on their big theories. So maybe that was something that was, hopefully, that I matured out of.
I'm baffled only because I can't think of a single piece of fiction of yours that seems as though it's has a they all seem to be asking questions or exploring things rather than imposing some sort of didactic vision. So I'm wondering when that transition, when that shift in your approach, was it slowly over time, or was it you woke up one day and thought?
I think that the only shift, the approach has always been the same in that, I really try to write unconsciously, and that's always been true. And then I have to edit and do many, many, many drafts. I think maybe over time, so all that would have changed is the editing and sort of how important I feel it is to assert and reassert. Mm-hmm. And I think probably I got most of that out of my system with my first book, as I think back. Although I have to say, with Look at Me, I also did have a kind of theory, and I think I do sort of state it at a certain point. But hopefully there's enough other stuff there that it just kind of slides by, and people don't sense that I'm finally stood up on my podium to make my point.
But you are, one of the many things I love about your work, you are atypical, I think, in not alone, but atypical in contemporary American fiction, in really the exploration of ambitious ideas and themes and elements, right, which manifest both formally and in content, right? While remaining, it's what Heidi Julavit said, while remaining actually a great storyteller who grounds it all in that wonderful screwdriver and, those bath salts. And it isn't, you aren't somebody who has completely eschewed certain pleasures of storytelling. They're all there in spades. But you are also a novelist of ideas. And is that something that that arises out of who you are? Was it a deliberate choice early on? How does that?
I think it is, I hope it's who I am. It's definitely how I write, in that it is, I feel like for me to start something, two things have to conjoin. One is, and they don't include people, interestingly. One is a strong sense of place. That is really, I'm most driven by place. And that is really who I am, actually. I really have found that more and more. I dream about, my dreams have a real emphasis on place. I have a repeated good dream, which is that I am able to push through a wall in a place that's very familiar to me, and I find a whole new wing of rooms or a garden that I didn't know was there. These are wonderful dreams. And I think actually they're dreams about writing. And so for me to start, I always have to have some sense of atmosphere, a time and a place. In this case, it was very literal. It was, a hotel bathroom. That's unusual in that I rarely am inspired by a moment of my own life. But in this case, I think the reason I was that it linked up to a whole other fascination that I had forgotten about, which was the fascination with the thief, which I had actually thought of trying to write about at an earlier point, but I was missing the atmosphere. So just being interested in the thief, that's nothing for me. Nothing happens. It has to await some sort of conjunction with this other stuff. The other thing that has to be there is some, or often more than one, fairly abstract idea or question, or more questions. So some questions that I think this material linked up with, and obviously I didn't even know I was writing a book at first. One was, I'd been reading Proust, rereading. I had read some Proust as a younger person and not been that enchanted with it. But then in a book group, my husband and I read all of Proust, and we read In Search of Lost Time. I think it took us 6 years. And we actually gave birth to, I believe, 5 children among us in the group. So we lived it. We sort of had our own Proustian, life unfolding as we were reading the book. And I found myself thinking how, I would like to write a book about time. I think it's the perfect subject because it's the ingredient that actually makes the novel form possible. In a way, every book is a book about time passing, even if it's an instant. And so I thought how pure and kind of wonderful to actually make time your subject. And the way Proust does it is in this sort of real-time way. It's there's this tremendous sense of like the momentary way that time, of instants passing and then years passing. And he really writes about aging in this amazing way. So I thought, okay, how could you do it but not in this real-time way? Because first of all, he already did it. And second of all, I don't know if I can. So I had been kind of thinking about that. And then I had also been watching The Sopranos and loving that series. I don't actually watch much TV, but I found it so novelistic. I found myself thinking about the characters when I wasn't watching, and I kept thinking, what is so great about this? And I realized it was the serialized nature of it that I loved. It had so much in common with 19th century novels, you know, multiple plot lines, sometimes almost a loss of a sense of what the big story even was, because I would be so caught up in a particular season. The big arcs kind of disappeared at times and then reappeared. And so I think somehow these questions about writing about time and how to do it fused with the idea of serialization as a form. And all of that seemed like a way to move, and then all of that sort of came to mind when I found that I was writing a book in these pieces. And I thought, okay, this is a book about time. I had also really wanted to write about the music industry. I'd had a lot of failed attempts to do that as a journalist. I just couldn't get a story, or the story would disappear. So I had a kind of yen to do that. And so there was a fusion, and that's kind of how it usually works. I only know later, really, what all those ingredients are, because again, being intuitive means I'm not sitting there thinking, I'll combine this idea and that idea. It's just I have a sense of moving forward.
Did you know, for example, that you would go into the future in that?
No, I did not.
Okay.
In fact, I went very reluctantly into the future. I was forced into the future because the principle of the book really is curiosity. Okay, we're sort of curious about someone. Now let's see them at a different point. So I thought, according to those rules, I have to see who Alex becomes when he grows up. You know, he's clearly very young, younger than he told her, and they both said they were 28, but she's much older, he's obviously much younger. So he's sort of judgmental about New York, and sort of thinks he's better than this and wants to leave. So what's his future? Well, the only way to get there, because we know that it's, for various reasons, we know that it's around 2000 and, when is that first chapter? I guess 2006.
Yes, it's 5 years after.
I thought, okay, but so if he's like, if the oldest he could be is 23 or 24, how am I going to see him in his future and not go into the future? And I was so desperate not to do it that I toyed with the idea of moving the entire timeline of the book backward.
But then you had the late 70s.
Right, then I'm suddenly dealing with Elvis, right. There was I wanted punk rock, so I was sort of stuck. A lot of things that people think are good about this book came about because I had no choice. And that was one of them. So I thought, all right, here we go. And in fact, what made it possible once I had resigned myself to it was, again, a sense of atmosphere, a kind of a sense of the heat. I would never write that chapter the way I did now because it's been kind of superseded by reality. But
the reality, oddly, that's another thing I wanted to ask you about. More than once, you have been prescient. You have foreseen some version of what's to come. It would look at me, and sort of the reality, ordinary people thing, and then this, just the idea. I feel there probably are parrots. There probably are, plants in every crowd. Certainly the virtual office that is just her device, right? That we're there.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I can really. I'm maybe 6 months ahead. I'm not sure that really counts as prescience, but I think if I'm imagining forward, I'm dealing with all the same things that we all know in a moment. Jane Smiley used a phrase that I absolutely loved when I heard her speak recently: the energy of logic. And I feel like really by the energy of logic propels me into territory that, sure, it comes true because it's logical. I'm just following the same logic that events end up following. And so sometimes I've imagined things that have ended up being similar to what actually happened because it was inevitable that they would happen.
Right. But I think it's one of the things, certainly I know, speaking to students, many of whom are in the room, that for many young people, there's a sense reading your work, which maybe people don't have so much reading the work of our contemporaries, that you are recording and writing about a present reality in all its complexity, in which people really are living, if you see what I mean. It's not. You don't shy away from these from technology on the one hand, but also these bigger ideas about, you know, how is the self different in this present time with these changing constraints, you know, and that has to be a deliberate choice.
Well, it is, in that I feel like that is the big story I've witnessed in my lifetime. I mean, technological change. You know, I'm 54. From the time I was born until I went to college, to my knowledge, in my daily life, there had been zero telecommunication development. 18 years, imagine that. Then the answering machine came along. And that actually was a huge change, because up until then, you know, the phone rang, and either it rang and rang and rang, or someone answered it, or you got a busy signal. Those were your options. So to go from that to actually being able to leave a message, in a way, that was sort of everything. I mean, so, okay, then we all kind of know what's happened since then. So, you know, I feel like that is the story I've witnessed. I mean, obviously other things have happened too, and God knows they continue to happen. I mean, the story is certainly not over, but a lot of the things that are interesting and strange and, you know, concerning that have happened, let's say, in the last 15 years, really are completely linked to technological developments. Right. I mean, modern terrorism is all about doing a relatively small thing and having it reverberate through the media. It would be impossible without mass media. So that's one phenomenon. You know, so I guess it has become the lens through which I end up looking at a lot of things, because it just feels apt. It doesn't even feel artificial. It just feels essential. And I guess I do feel like a real witness of that, having lived or sort of come of age, maybe at the last moment we'll ever see, in which there was no telecommunications development for 18 years. Now, in fact, I was in San Francisco. Silicon Valley was a hop, skip, and a jump away, and big things were happening there. We didn't know. But I'm very interested in that, actually, in the way that was brewing, and its relationship to the 60s, which I was very aware of having sort of missed growing up in San Francisco in the 70s. So it was latent, but it was invisible.
Right. I'm now going to ask you about your new book, because I think it turns away from some of these things.
Yes, as I'm saying all this, I'm thinking, but you're not doing any of that now. Oh, well.
Because it's set some time ago with no cell phones and
I think that's one reason I wanted to do it, actually. I mean, I didn't know. I've been drawn to, again, atmosphere being crucial. I've been drawn to the war years for a long time, without really knowing why. I just felt a kind of longing to be there, I guess you could say.
May get there again.
Yes, I know. I meant that war. But anyway, so I was sort of interested in that, and then I found myself looking at a lot of pictures of New York during the war years, and thinking about the fact that, and sort of recalling that it is a harbor, that it is a waterfront, and that is really why New York exists as the city we know it, even though you can live there for, you know, decades and barely think about the waterfront. And all of that kind of led me into a great deal of research about all kinds of things, which ended up informing my story. But I think the wish to, I mean, in each book, I love the feeling of it having no overlap with what I've just done, and really being kind of a tonic. And this new one, really, I have to say it. I mean, at first I thought, well, how am I going to do that? Because I used every trick I have and I tried some that didn't work, like epic poetry, in Goon Squad. So how am I going to do something that feels different? Like, I couldn't figure that out. Technically, how will I? But in a way, the answer already existed, because it was by going to a moment technologically in which none of that has happened yet. And I guess I wasn't in the mood to do that when I saw the wallet and ended up taking this huge detour. I think I wanted to be in the present day and write more about technology, which the last 2 books had been very involved with too. I just wasn't ready to kind of walk away from all that. But it was such a fun detour, such a diversion to not think about technology in the book very much.
So formally, does that have repercussions formally too?
It had big repercussions. Not as I thought that it would. I thought, oh, well, this will be so much fun because now my challenge is how am I going to write a novel set in the past in which we're aware of the present all the time in ways that are fun. And I thought, well, there are lots of, I've already kind of done that at times. You know, I had leaps forward in Goon Squad, and I was interested in how the present moment felt when we're always aware of what will happen next. And I found that this book was, those things died immediately, or rather the material died. I could not make anything like that work. It was a story that only felt alive when it was told, you know, straight, as it were. And so that really made me nervous because I thought, well, wait a minute, that's not really what I do. I mean, I haven't done that in ages. I thought I'd kind of outgrown it. But what I found was that actually, I mean, this is definitely the hardest book I've written, the new one. It was so difficult. I don't know if writing conventionally was what was difficult about it. I think it was more writing, being such a time and place driven person, trying to write outside of my lifetime felt a little like trying to write without arms or something. Like I needed to know so much, and yet I didn't know what I needed to know because I write so intuitively that I didn't know what my story was. So there was a kind of complicated dialectic between research and story. But it is told conventionally. And I mean, there's an awareness, of course, of the present day. And at a certain point, I think that awareness is just inherent. I don't need to point it out. It's just there. We all know where we are now. And that is going to have to be enough.
So is it a third person? Are there different
It is
points
third
of view?
person different. There are 3 main characters, 2 men and a woman. And it is all in the third person, yes.
But told so that we have a sense, I mean, told in retrospect so that we have a sense of this present, or you mean the reader inherently knows about
The
it?
reader inherently, there is no winking or acknowledging of you know, no collusion with the reader of, you know, going into the past. That was so disappointing when I tried to do it. It felt so annoying, frankly. I mean, I have a writing group, and when I would read sections in which that happened, they would riot with anger that I was doing that. They would say, why do you keep doing that? We hate it every time you do it. And I kept saying, but I feel like I have to find some way to incorporate the present. They were allergic to that. And I was allergic to it. I loathed it when I would read it aloud. So it all had to go.
So interesting. You know, there's a phrase that Peter Carey uses about Oscar and Lucinda that I love, and he says that he thought of it as writing a science fiction of the past, and that in that way he sort of liberated himself from the sometimes onerous constraints of what was, or not being able always to fully know, you know, what words. They're sort of the opposite of Charles Fraser's Cold Mountain, where he, you know, used the vocabulary and the syntax and everything, to sort of take a leap off the ground and say, I'm going to jump into it and make it up. Did you have some ultimately, I mean, as somebody who needs place, did you ultimately have some sense of doing that, of sort of making it a place from here, or
Finally,
you did?
yes. I think the reason it was so hard was that I felt like I couldn't, it took me a long time to feel comfortable enough that I could kind of do what I do in the material. Right. I felt sort of constrained. And it's not that people can't do, I mean, I just finished George Saunders' Lincoln in the Borough. I mean, it's so great. And I have to say, I thought, why didn't I do that? Which is nutty, because the idea, of course, never occurred to me. But it was just so free. I loved his freedom. somehow that is not what this book wanted to be. Right. But I did finally reach a point where I felt like I could make, I mean, it's crazy things happen. Don't get me wrong, but I did finally reach a point where I felt authoritative. And I have to say, I've never been more excited to get to that point because it was so hard won. It really felt then like a real escape and a thrill to work on. So that was really nice to finally get there.
That's great. I want to ask you one more question, but I'm mindful that we're time-wise. Perhaps we should open it to the audience and see if the audience has questions, because I think time-wise. So I can ask you my question later. Is there anybody who would, Professor Bava?
Thank you very much, both of you, for a really wonderful fireside chat. You talked about writing intuitively, and the method that led you to follow. And then you talked about the energy of logic, about how things happen as they happen. So is the energy of logic part of the intuitive, unconscious drive?
I think it is, because I think that's a good question. I think that for me, the energy of logic, I mean, which is not my phrase, but Jane Smiley's, is something that I'm trying to tap into a logic that is deeper than my own logic, which might be asking questions like, so what should happen next, or what makes sense? I find that the ideas I have consciously are not interesting on the whole. And there are countless examples of that. I mean, where I think, oh, yeah, okay, I know. For example, I wanted to write in PowerPoint, so I thought, well, who would use PowerPoint? I know, a corporate person. Okay, that's a pretty obvious idea. I mean, it's reasonable, it's logical, you might say, but it was dead on arrival because the form is very corporate. So if you compound that with a sort of corporate story, it just begins to feel very cold. What finally worked better was something that I hadn't thought of for a long time, and in fact only thought of because of my desperation that I spoke of earlier to visit my character Sasha in her future, but not right from her point of view. And that led me to think about her children. And when I thought, wait, what if a kid is telling a story in PowerPoint? That gets rid of the corporate problem. And suddenly, again, atmosphere and place being so important, we already know that Sasha lives in the desert, and I had a sense that the desert, that somehow I could use PowerPoint to render the desert. So, maybe the energy of logic is something different from my own attempts to be logical. I guess that's what I would say. It's not that, it's not that every idea I have is bad, but it's more that if I can think of it, it's probably not that great an idea. It should be something I can't think of. Those are the ideas I'm looking for, and those only seem to come about when I'm not thinking in a cerebral way. I can recognize them, but I can't seem to arrive at them just sitting in a chair. Like in the new book that I'm working on, it's a kind of intricately plotted book, really. It involves a young woman who has, it seems like only a small number of things can end up happening to her. She has a problem. And I thought, I don't want any of those things to happen. What is the solution to this problem? And I couldn't think of one. And I thought, well, you better come up with one. And I just kind of waited, and the material itself seemed to suggest an option that I hadn't thought of, and that was definitely the right one. So that's what I'm looking for.
Thank you.
Over here.
Yeah, so I'm very intrigued by the idea that you I'm intrigued by the idea that you conducted oral histories in order to do this novel. So can you talk about the tension between the true stories, or the true as told to you, and your imagination, and how much affinity you feel to the historical truths versus your imagination?
I feel huge affinity to the historical truths. I mean, I think this book was really I felt as much like a journalist as a fiction writer while I was working on this. And I've done, some very long, heavily researched journalistic pieces as a kind of moonlighting career. And I've always really loved doing that. And I felt a kind of obsessive attention to knowing every single thing. Now, obviously, it's a truism that, if you try to inflict that on the reader, everyone will just take a nap. And so I didn't want to do that, but I wanted to know it. And I felt like I only had a kind of solid platform upon which to do my thing when I felt like I knew all of that. So, I was, first of all, just recording oral histories is a useful and fascinating thing to do in and of itself. And there were plenty of moments. I mean, I didn't even think about what I was trying to do as I listened to these mostly women talk. I forgot who I was. I mean, that's always what happens to me in interviews, and it's wonderful. It felt like a distant memory that all of this was somehow supposed to result in fiction. And in fact, I was working on those. I was conducting most of those interviews and listening to them when I was working on Goon Squad. And in a way, they kind of intersected with it in that it made me think a lot about time and about the arc of a life. So there was overlap in a way thematically. In the end, it's all made up, although I certainly seized a few details from some of these stories. For example, one woman told a story about riding along a pier on a bike and sliding on some gravel. And it was during her lunch break. Someone had lent her a bike. She was working at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. All of these women were, and usually in their late teens or early 20s. And suddenly hearing this chorus of this riot of catcalling and realizing she was right next to a huge ship and there were all these sailors up above laughing at her. And she still, the shame and the embarrassment of that, I could still feel talking to her when she was in her 80s. I used that, I wholesale lifted that bike anecdote. And I obviously, mentioned her in my acknowledgments. So there were cases like that, but in the end, I wrote it the way I would anything, just making it up. So there was, I don't know if there was tension exactly. There were just a lot of different parts of researching this. There are also a lot of technical things like deep sea diving, and so I got very involved with divers now. Many of them were diving during the Vietnam War. But I did actually interview a gentleman who dove during World War II, which was really fascinating. I guess in the moment of talking to these people, all I thought about was wanting to know everything. And I forgot about any greater project I was trying to do. And it was years, really, between those interviews and the writing of the book. But I'm sure glad I got to do that.
Did you have somebody transcribe them for you?
Because I was working with, I did transcribe some, but because we were working ultimately with the Brooklyn Historical Society, they didn't want to have me transcribing. They actually had it done professionally, which was great. So those are, and sometimes I would interview people, like some of the merchant mariners I've interviewed. So these were men who worked during World War II on merchant ships, on Liberty ships. I talked to some of them on the phone and just typed as I talked, so there actually is no recording of some of those interviews. I was starting to feel a little pressed for time at that point. But the research was so enriching that even when I had a very long period, as my husband knows, when I truly did not think this was going to work out. I just thought, this is not going to be good, and I'm not going to publish a bad book. So that's it. Even then, I always felt this sense of quickening and excitement when I would approach the research, whatever it was, whether I was going back to the Jeremiah O'Brien, which is a Liberty ship in San Francisco. I could be incredibly down, or these picayune details, like at the National Archives, I poured with exaltation over hundreds of photos of plumbing repairs at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, because I thought I learned things from every single photo. So then I would think, I couldn't be so fascinated by this if there were nothing to do, if I have nothing to do with all of it. Like, why is this interesting? And it really gave me hope as I worked. The level of obsession with these details seemed like a good sign. And in the end, I did feel like I was able to finally do my thing in the material. It just took a really long time.
From start to finish, from the first,
Well, first interviews, 2005.
so 10 years more.
Yeah, more, and thank goodness, because a lot of those ladies,
Right.
are
You
either
didn't
not as lucid or even not here. I mean, many people I've interviewed have passed away.
You
since
didn't
then.
have that much time. I mean, I'm aware of that, say, from the time of our youth till now, all the people who
Yeah,
who were
stories-
interviewed in the 80s and 90s and are not living now.
Yeah, and thank goodness there were some great oral histories, and they got started before I did. I mean, there was a particular woman who was very inspiring to me, a woman named Lucille Culkin, who wrote a bunch of letters back and forth to her husband, Alfred Culkin. They met working at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and she was just a wonderful letter writer, full of, excitement and joy. At one point, she kissed the paper, and it was so startling to see the impression of her lips, because it could have happened the day before. Every single line of her lips was so clear, and she would fantasize about how many children they would have when the war was over. And at a certain point, I thought, I have to know, where is this woman? What's she doing now? So I stood up and I Googled her, because there was a computer right there, and I went from her recounting a dream of having a son and wondering what her life would be, to reading her obituary within the span of 30 seconds. And it was one of the eeriest moments. Again, technology. I mean, it's strange to be able to know all of that within the span of a minute. Anyway, I wrote an essay about feeling like I became friends with this woman. It was called Reading Lucy, and was in a collection of essays about Brooklyn. And about 2 months later, I got an email, and the subject line was, "I am Lucy's daughter." And so these kinds of experiences are so amazing. Al was still alive. He was 90. We took him back to the Navy Yard, where he had not been since he had worked there, with both of his daughters. They had 2 daughters, and their families. It was a big caravan. We all went back to the Navy Yard, and we stood in Building 128, which was the machine shop where he had worked, which was this huge, cacophonous, giant space back then. And when we were there, it was just like a big empty wind tunnel. And standing with this 90-year-old gentleman and watching him have that moment was incredible. And he just passed away last year at 98. So amazing experiences. It really had nothing to do with the book in a certain way, and yet they all fed it.
Oh, do we have time, or is it time to?
I have
do
time.
we have time? We could have maybe one more question, and then, yes, ma'am.
I wonder whether you could talk a little bit more about your writing group, because I was really intrigued to hear that you tested out some passages on them and then used their feedback to sort of, jig things around.
I'm extremely reliant on my writing group. We are kind of motley bunch who have been together for a long time. Just a few of us. I mean, people sort of move, and but there's about like a core of about 5 or 6 people. I really feel like for me, it is so helpful to find out whether material feels alive. That's really the main thing I use them for. It's very hard for me to know that. I guess I should, but I sometimes really can't tell. So we only read aloud. There's no homework. There's no manuscript. You walk into the room, you read, and everyone has the experience at once. Often I know before I've finished reading, how it's going. I mean, there's nothing like the feeling of either the deadness of something really kind of sinking, as we all have that, or the excitement that you can feel people really reacting. Sometimes, and I'm often wrong, like I'll swagger in there and think, oh, they're gonna love this, and oh my God, the dead feeling comes, and I can barely even get through it. And then other times, I'm really afraid, and I can feel a kind of kinetic sense as I read. So it's also great in terms of being aware of the music of the language, the rhythms and the sounds. I mean, it was an oral tradition after all, and I think that dimension lives so much more fully when reading aloud without a text, without any visual. And then I also sometimes bring in things that they've even heard before that were so, problematic that I've made gigantic changes, and I want to kind of know how they've landed. Interestingly, I would say that with Manhattan Beach, it was less helpful to bring in material with this book than any other. And I'm not quite sure why that was. I mean, at the time I thought it was further, I mean, it just felt like it never really was that great in the writing group. Now, it may be that I will come to understand that, in a different way when this book is out in the world. But at a certain point, I felt like for whatever reason, this is in parts, it's not lending itself as much as other things I have to being read in these small parts. I think some of the technical stuff felt a little bit alienating at times. But anyway, they also read, we read each other's whole books. So a number of them read this and again, were extremely helpful. So it's just, I really love having access to people who I know are on my side, but who will be honest with me. And I think we all share a wish to know as much what is working as what is not. I find that so useful. I mean, it's, that becomes the blueprint for fixing whatever's not working. So it's just tremendously helpful. And I don't know what I'd do without them.
Maybe that we'll stop there. We'll stop.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was wonderful.